Hey everyone, welcome back to my little corner of the internet. I hope you are all doing well. I have been meaning to film this what I've been reading recently video for about a month, and in that time I have read more books that I want to add into this video, so I'm going to keep this intro really short and get straight into the books. The first book is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and even before I started reading this book I had a feeling that I was really going to like it because I really enjoyed Everything I've Never Told You, also by Celeste Ng. Little Fires Everywhere is set in the fictional town of Shaker Heights, and the narrators are kind of from two different families. The first family are the Richardsons, and they have 4 children who are all within 1 year of each other, and then new to Shaker Heights is a lady called Mia Warren and her daughter Pearl, who end up living in the Richardsons' rental property. And Pearl quite quickly becomes quite good friends with all of the Richardson kids, so they kind of take her under her wing and she's pretty much always at their house. Mia ends up working for the Richardsons as well, so the two families' lives are definitely quite intertwined. The first part of the book kind of follows the families like getting to know each other and seeing them like slowly become more and more intertwined, and then a large focus of the book is set around a custody battle of a baby who is in Shaker Heights as well, between the actual mother of the baby and then the adopted parents of the baby. Don't want to give too much away, so that's all I'm going to say, but that custody battle also then involves the Richardsons and Mia and Pearl, and it kind of like creates fragments within their relationship as well. While that is going on, there's a few other dramas in the Richardson family and with Mia and Pearl as well, and then you also find out a bit more about Mia's life before Pearl came along and like what was happening there. So it's a really interesting book. I feel like that probably wasn't the best description, but I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing about it. I just knew that I would enjoy it, and I really did. It was kind of like a slow burner. It wasn't like super action paced or fast paced or whatever, but it was really good. I really liked the ending. I think it tied everything back together again, and yeah, I just finished it feeling really content. And for any of you good readers, I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book was called Into the Water by Paula Hawkins, and this one was definitely like a super intense like thriller suspense novel. The main premise of this book follows a lady called Jules who is being dragged back to the town where she grew up. I can't remember the name of it. But she's being dragged back there because her sister Nell has drowned in what they call the drowning pool, which is like a lake in the town which quite a few women have drowned in, especially over recent years. So it's kind of like suspicious already because you wonder what on earth is going on with this pool. It's kind of more suspicious because Nell was actually investigating and writing a story about all of the different women who have drowned in the pool over the years. And Nell and Jules fell out quite a while ago and they hadn't spoken for a really long time. But just before her death, Nell was trying to get back in contact with Jules and Jules refused to answer the phone. So Jules is carrying around some of that guilt as well. And then she's also really confused as to what happened to her sister, and she's trying to figure out that mystery along with the police as well. One thing that definitely was a bit iffy to me at the very beginning was that there's a heck of a lot of narrators telling the story of Into the Water. So I think there's like 7 or 8 different people who are telling like different parts of the story that make up the book. And I do a lot of my reading on my commute, I've mentioned that before, so I'm kind of only reading for like 20 to 30 minutes here and there. So it definitely was quite confusing at first because I'd pick up the book again and not remember who a character was and how they fitted into the story. But once I got over that, I definitely did enjoy it. The ending was one that, like, as I was going along the book, I kind of thought might have been a possibility, but it wasn't super obvious, so I definitely was still surprised when the ending happened. There was a little bit of like ghosts and spirit stuff in the book as well, which I feel like maybe was like a little bit disjointed. It didn't have to be in there, but I guess it did make up the story, and I did still really enjoy the story. And I rated this one 4 stars on Goodreads as well. The next book is called Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell, and this one was also one of those like suspense novels, and I found it really intense. I read it in like 2.5 days and I just really wanted to know what happened, and I really enjoyed it. I think I also rated this one 4 stars. But it follows the life of Laurel and her daughter Allie, who when Allie is 15, she vanishes without a trace and we have no clue what had happened to her. The book flips between 2 different timelines, the first being before Allie went missing and then 10 years into the future, where Laurel is definitely struggling with the loss of her daughter. She has no clue if she is alive or not. And even though she has 2 other children who are now growing up, she definitely has a bit of a strained relationship with them because she's just feeling so broken inside. One day Laurel is just sitting in a cafe having a cup of coffee, and she meets this guy called Floyd, who also becomes quite a main character in the book. And she kind of is completely swept off her feet by Floyd, and then they start a relationship, and then quite soon into that relationship Floyd introduces Laurel to his daughter, who she is completely kind of taken aback by because this daughter looks a lot like Ellie, so she's having all these memories of her daughter who is missing. The thing with suspense novels is that I never know how much of the story to tell you because I don't want to ruin the surprise at all, but I also want to make sure I have like a decent explanation of what happens in the book. But I think I'm not giving too much away if I also say in this book, it's about halfway through maybe where you find out what happened to Ellie, and then she also becomes a narrator in the book telling like in the lead up to her disappearance and then what happened after her disappearance, where she's gone and things like that. And then it all kind of ties in together really nicely at the end, and it definitely was still suspenseful. Again, you can kind of like predict what's going to happen, but I do like the twists and turns along the way that kind of like make you question whether that is the right path or not. But yeah, definitely really enjoyed this book and could not put it down. Next up is a book called The Perfect Roommate by Minka Kent, and I had high expectations for this book. When I was reading the blurb, it looked like it was going to be a really good suspense thriller novel, which is what I'd been reading, and I'd been on a really good roll of it. But I don't know, I just found this one really hard to get into. I only rated it 2 stars on Goodreads. I'm not sure if it was because of the main character, but this follows the life of a girl called Meadow who moves into a flat with someone who is in her same university. I think they're going to the same courses and stuff. And everything seems to be pretty perfect, hence the perfect roommate. But then pretty quickly she finds out that her roommate maybe isn't who she says she is, or she's not exactly telling the truth. She does a few things throughout the book that makes Meadow question whether she is her friend or maybe if she's not someone that she should be trusting. The big like event in the book is that a professor at the university that Meadow knows quite well is killed, and there's all this big drama around who did it. Meadow thinks it was her flatmate that did it, so she starts freaking out. She goes to the police, but they almost like don't believe her, and then all this other crazy stuff happens after that where Meadow almost ends up getting killed as well. So I'm gonna leave it at that because again I don't want to give anything away. But I don't know, I just found Meadow's character really hard to like, and I do wonder maybe if I'd warmed to her a bit more if I had enjoyed the book more, I don't know. But at the very beginning of the book she's kind of dissing girls like her roommate and girls who like to go out and party and you know, like have nice hair, have nice clothes and stuff, and then pretty quickly her roommate starts giving her some of her old clothes. She takes her to get her hair done and stuff, and she kind of morphs essentially into her roommate. And then there's a part in the book where she morphs into someone else as well. And I don't know, I just didn't really like how like flip-floppy she was, and she seemed to have such strong morals, but then as soon as she'd meet someone that she really liked, she'd like completely transform into them. Next book I read was called Trust No One by Paul Cleave, and this one was pretty cool because it was set in Christchurch, New Zealand, so I definitely felt like those vibes with it being written by a New Zealander and set in New Zealand. This one follows the life of an author called Jerry Gray who writes under the pseudonym Henry Cutter, and he writes like murder mystery suspense novels. Jerry is diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's quite early on in the book, and he starts keeping what he calls the madness journal, which is like his I guess journey from discovering that he has Alzheimer's, kind of like just keeping a day-to-day record of his life. The twist in this book is that in the very first chapter Jerry is sitting in a police holding cell and he's confessing to who he assumes is like a police investigator how he murdered this woman, and he's going into a lot of detail about exactly what happened, exactly how he killed her. And what he doesn't know is that the murder he's confessing to is actually one that only exists in his head, because it's one that was like his very first book was the murder that happened in that book, and the person he thinks is the police interviewer is actually his daughter. The book was quite fragmented, and as a reader you were at times were quite confused as to what was going on, but I did like that because Jerry has Alzheimer's, obviously he's not even sure what's going on, so why should the reader know what's going on? And yeah, really liked the ending. It was super frustrating, but I think it was the perfect ending for this book, and I think anything else would have kind of ruined the flow of the book. It was one of those endings that gave away just enough information but also let you form your own opinions. So I'll leave that at that. And then last but not least is the last book, which I finished reading this morning, which is called Never Let You Go by Chevy Stevens. Before I go any further, I would also just say that this book has a massive trigger warning for domestic violence, so if that is something that triggers you, definitely skip this part of the review and skip reading this book. It's centered around Lindsay and Andrew and their daughter Sophie, and it's told in 2 different timelines, the first being when Sophie was about 6 years old and they were still family, to when Andrew is getting out of jail about 10 or 12 years later, and Sophie and Lindsay are kind of a bit terrified because they feel like they're being stalked and they feel like Andrew is seeking revenge on them. Because Andrew is now getting out of jail, Lindsay is really terrified because she kind of had a hand in putting him in jail in the first place. And Sophie, being 6 years old when he went to jail, she doesn't really know her father, so it's a pretty interesting dynamic in the family that all she knows is that her mother was super terrified of Andrew. She was abused mentally and physically, and she, like, you know, wants nothing to do with Andrew, but Sophie for her is also her father and she's curious to know what he's like. All this creepy stuff starts happening to Lindsay and she is convinced that it is Andrew coming back, as I said, for revenge, and the book kind of follows them as they are trying to like catch Andrew out sort of thing so that they can like send him back to jail so they can be free of him. But at the same time, Andrew is insisting that he's innocent in this whole thing and that someone else is trying to get them. This book also reminded me of another book I read about 1 or 2 years ago called Black Eyed Susans. It kind of follows the same plot in terms of someone's getting out of jail and they're terrorizing someone and their teenage daughter. If any of you who read that, you might find the similarities with this book as well. But yeah, I finished reading it this morning. It was a good ending. It was kind of like a movie ending, what I like to call them, so you know, I could just imagine it being like a big dramatic ending in a film rather than in the book. But I do think like it did kind of work with the book, and then the ending definitely gave you a lot of closure. I rated it 3 stars because it definitely wasn't as good as some of the suspense novels that I've read this year, but I did definitely enjoy it. And that is all of the books that I have to talk to you about. So much like a quick intro, I'm also going to keep this outro short because I feel like this video was really long. Remember to leave me your book recommendations down in the comment section, or if you have read any of the books that I talked about today, let me know your thoughts on them in the comment section as well. I'll leave a link to my Goodreads if any of you want to check it out or see some more reviews of these books. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next week with a vlog. Bye!